Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Satan and Coffee. I am Adius Dade, and something that we normally don't do on Satan and Coffee that we are going to start doing more frequently is have guests. And with me this morning is Shea Bile. Once again, welcome.
Good morning, Adius. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Coffee and got my Satans.
Yeah, so I didn't have time. I didn't have time to do coffee this morning because I was too busy putting sound panels on in front of the computer for more audio density. So that took a solid hour and a half to do. I did up the whole corner.
Yeah, I decided to do a drive. I'm doing a double, kind of a double sojourn. First to Southern California, which I visit often because that's where I grew up. But then in the middle of it, I'm deciding to drive up the coast, which is beautiful if you've ever been to California, Northern California. So I'm deciding to do a solitary sojourn. I'm in a hotel right now. That's why you would never see me color coordinate with gray and gold leaf, but that's what you guys have to reconcile here for my insight today.
I mean, my background's not much better. I mean, I got my kitchen right behind me, and because there's the back door, so it's just flooded with light, right? So, like the morning shows, unfortunately, the whole dark, spooky vibe just kind of goes out the window.
Sure.
So I get it. I get it. So, what we're going to be doing today, so do I have a lot for us to go over today? So I knowing that you're coming on this morning, so I sat down and I put my philosophy hat on, and went through some of my favorite books of Nietzsche, and then I thought it would be interesting when I started doing is I started crossing it over with Jung, and so yeah, we got a lot to go through, because there are some points that, sadly, I've not read your book. I would like to. Somebody said that they were going to send me a PDF. I don't know who that was, but somebody said they were going to send me a PDF. And
How did they get a PDF?
No idea.
I've kind of leaked it in certain places. I did a class. I was teaching a class at Stetson University in Florida, and I leaked it to the students, and then I sent it to a few reviewers. So it's probably out there by now,
Right. Yeah.
After the second edition, I think after the second edition is kind of done, I'll release it. I don't like Jeff Bezos, but I'll probably release it on Amazon or something to make it universally
Mm-hmm.
available as a paperback, and then I'll just leak it. I'll just leak it on the internet, different groups, and just make the PDF available so people have a proper PDF and they don't have to scan like the more
Right.
pricey versions, and then there's a
Mm-hmm.
shitty PDF online. So I'm eventually just gonna.
Yeah.
It'll be nice if you buy a copy, but also wait like 3 years and I'll just give it to you for free. So
No, I mean, I will definitely buy a copy. That'll definitely happen.
yeah,
But so I don't have your book in mind for comparison, so I don't know the full direction that you go with it. But obviously, I'm very adept with left-hand path philosophy. I'm a fan of Nietzsche. I'm not sure if I would call myself a scholar of him, but definitely my favorite philosopher, even though I wouldn't consider myself a nihilist. Maybe back in high school I was, but not today. uh, and Yeah, and then I found going through stuff with my studying of Carl Jung, there's a lot of crossover, that was very interesting. So I'm
sure,
hoping that we can hash that out today.
sure.
And you will be the first person that I don't want any of my shows to be political, but there is a giant elephant in the room that kind of needs to be talked about,
Sure.
and we will cover that as well at some point in the show, probably closer towards the end. So to start out, what is the book about, and like what got you into Nietzsche, and what brought the crossover?
Yeah, so my introduction to the left-hand path, being the age that I am and coming up in the age that I did, this is pre-internet, just pre-internet. I got my exposure like a lot of other of my peers and colleagues did, and that was through the Satanic Bible and the work of Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan and all of that. And when very quickly going through the texts and then understanding some of the influence that went into it, like Might is Right and Ragnar Redbeard, and all the other philosophers that that he named in his works, Nietzsche was a frequent mention, and um, it became very clear to me that Nietzsche had a profound inspiration on Satanism. He would also mention Ayn Rand quite a bit. So Randian objectivism would come up in his brew of Satanism, his more materialistic view, more elitist view, more might is right, lex talionis view, social Darwinistic view of Satanism that caught hold in the late 60s. Nietzsche was always front and center. In the first edition of the Satanic Bible, he's in the dedication. It's dedicated to Friedrich Nietzsche. So it always made sense to me that there was some vein of Nietzschean philosophy that interwove itself into the tapestry of not just LaVeyan Satanism, what we call LaVeyan Satanism today, but what would come after that. If you look at almost any within the left-hand path umbrella, from chaos magic to even trad witchcraft to even veins. Wicca's not left-hand path, but if you even look at certain veins of Wicca, which is inspired by the idea of the will through Aleister Crowley, the very fundamental aspects of the esoteric, of the occult today, is inspired by Nietzsche, not just the left-hand path, which is far more obvious, but even the concept of the will, the honor thy will, your true will, the thelemic mantra was inspired by Nietzsche. So this is what kind of led me down trying to understand it at 12 and 13. And quite frankly, I did not. I would just kind of read through his aphorisms and try to understand them. And I gleaned some understanding, but it took another 15, 20 years for me to take the study more seriously. When I went into graduate study in philosophy, religious studies, I moved to Belgium for a year and a half to get my master's. And like you, I decided I was most interested in Nietzsche and his influence on the esoteric. In the United States, it would have been harder to find a academic supervisor to look over that, but in Europe, it's quite easy because they follow what's called the continental tradition. So it's easier to get things like that. And they're like, "Oh, this is exciting! I have a Satanist who wants to do," it's very novel to them. So I was able to get it, sponsored by the university and the green light to work on it. So that's what became the book. Was my thesis, my master's thesis.
Nice. So with that, to that, those details. So do you think the LHP, the left-hand path, is somewhat of kind of like a modern enactment of Nietzsche's Ubermensch ideal?
There's certainly some obvious inspiration there. I think when we think of this idea of uh, self-overcoming, as Nietzsche calls it, we may not call it that in the left-hand path lexicon. But we'll call it apotheosis, becoming a god. Right? We'll say we want to become a god. We want to reach the height of God. That comes more or less directly from Aleister Crowley. And if you look at the Gnostic Mass, there is no part of me that is not of the gods. You turn to the audience, you cross your arms and say that. That got fed into and inspired Anton LaVey and Michael Aquino, the Church of Satan, the Temple of Set, and then that really blew open the doors to our idea of self-betterment, intentional um, self-immolation, so destroying oneself to become something greater. You had "Man That You Fear" playing in the intro music, I think,
I
and
did.
that's a very Nietzschean story, Antichrist Superstar, that album is. Because Man That You Fear is he goes through this entire journey of becoming a god, realizing what he is, realizing that he's becoming greater. He's reaching his own Ubermensch. That's what the Antichrist is for him. And in Man That You Fear, he's destroyed by his own standard. So he goes through this destructive process, this nihilistic process. It's a very Nietzschean story, and that is endemic to the left hand path. So, yes, the story Nietzsche of Nietzsche's Übermensch and all of the obstacles and falls that happen along the way are share a road with the left hand path, Satanism, Luciferianism, and so forth in the broader esoteric world. The only thing I'll say is that in some ways it's derivative, the left hand path is, in some ways it isn't. There's certain nuances and depth that is lost from Nietzsche's broad holistic philosophy, you know what I'm saying? So
Yep, definitely.
the Satanic Bible was once referred to by early scholars as a Nietzschean travesty, um, saying that, okay,
I've
LeVay
heard that.
took the real sexy one liners and put it into
Yep.
Satanic Bible. But you know, in my book, I talk about people before LeVay, like Stanislav Shipshevsky was a disciple of Nietzsche while Nietzsche was still alive. And so before Nietzsche died, there were people who called themselves Satanists who directly took influence from Friedrich Nietzsche. It's not just Anton LaVey 60, 70 years later. So there is a history. And that's why my new chapter in my book covers Stanislaw Szybyszewski, the Polish decadent, because it says, no, this was happening at the very beginning. This isn't just a LaVey connection,
Hmm.
you know.
Right. So with the turnaround in society, one thing I'm noticing culturally speaking,
Sure.
it kind of feels like the 90s are coming back. And so I've heard a lot more people talking about Nietzschean philosophy, nihilism, things of that nature. And with your book, I think you're republishing or doing the second edition in a perfect timing, because like the popularity of Nietzsche is really on a rise. But my question here is, how do we prevent Nietzsche from becoming reduced to a self-help meme instead of the dangerous thinker that he was?
I love that question. And that's an astute one. I mean, broadly speaking, we live in a time of memetics, like silly little memes where Nietzsche will talk about looking into the abyss, and then he'll talk about music, and then he'll talk about these one liners. I think those one liners are okay for in its own place, because to be fair, Nietzsche wrote a lot of aphorisms. So human all too human is like 3, 4, 5, 600 one sentence to a paragraph long. So Nietzsche was even kind of writing memes in his day. He even
Fair
said,
enough.
"What I write in one sentence is what other authors require a chapter, nay, require a whole book." So he was like, "I'm so badass." He did have a sense of this monumental sense of himself, which is fine. That's okay. But I you know we have a lot of resources to read Nietzsche now, and there's nothing wrong with throwing on like an LLM, especially some of the new thinking models. And one thing that's good for to use AI for right now, I think, is if you're reading something like Paradise Lost, or you're reading an older script that has language you don't quite understand, plugging it into like an LLM, like a line, and then saying, "Could you help me understand this line? I don't quite fully understand it. Could you give it to me in another way?" That's we have all the tools to understand these texts now, and over time you'll start to understand his particular language. Late 19th century academic philosophy. Nietzsche's not easy to read. He's not easy to
No.
read. When I was doing my thesis, I didn't. you had to do little Google searches to understand certain lines, but it was like when you really dig into Nietzsche, it gets pretty insufferable and difficult to get through. So for my thesis, by the time I was getting through the majority of his books, I had fatigue.
Hey, but
And yeah,
that's
so
like a
you just
rite
have
of
to
passage though with Nietzsche. Like, I mean,
yeah.
it's I
Yeah,
think the
reading
suffering is necessary.
yeah, right. And he had quite a bit himself, personal turmoil, like a lot of people in the world of the occult and esoteric. That's why I think we relate to him as an iconoclast. But I, you know, I think also he kind of broke a lot of the conventions of the time when he wrote. Some things might seem contradictory, some things evolve over time. Some things like what he considers nihilism and how to escape it kind of seem contradictory at certain points. And yeah, I think excerpting or getting excerpts of Nietzsche is sexy and fun and awesome. Reading Nietzsche, sitting down and fully trying to comprehend, understand it in a holistic way is fucking torturous. So
Yeah, it
that's
is. I say that from experience. I mean, I did most of my reading for Nietzsche when I was in high school. It was probably 10th grade, sophomore. And I was reading all at the same time. I was reading Mein Kampf, Hidden Hitler, the Satanic Bible, the Antichrist, and Ecce Homo. Uh, so,
that's heavy reading.
yeah,
Yeah,
I was
and
definitely did a lot of it back then.
yeah, and it kind of speaks to the broad influence that Nietzsche had and how universal it actually ended up becoming. There was this anger at the height of denouncing the world that was before the 19th century, so post Enlightenment, and people were looking towards deconstructing what came before in all its ways. So that's why in the acknowledgments, or more the preface, that's why in the preface of the book, I say he's inspired both, on one side, totalitarians or fascists, on the other side, socialists, communists, and everything in between. Um, he's had inspiration. Even some Christians have been inspired by Nietzsche. So he's had this broad influence. Because I often get asked the Nazi question. It comes up when talking about Nietzsche. It's happened a couple of times. Like, what about people saying, about Hitler's inspiration, about Nietzsche's works, often comes up. And, because he spoke of a strength, because he spoke of an elitism, because he spoke of this overcoming, of this overman, that was a tantalizing idea to a lot of people. That's to a lot of different groups who were looking. It's almost like the apocalyptic literature of the Second Temple period, biblical period. All these, like the Dead Sea Scrolls had all this. It's like revenge porn. All these like our enemies are gonna die, right? And they're gonna go to hell, and then we have this host of angels, and they're gonna save us, right? So that's all the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Qumran literature. Nietzsche was kind of like that, like apocalyptic literature of the late 19th century. People wanted to hear that there's a better way to do things. So yeah, a lot of groups were inspired by it, you know. So
Yeah, definitely. Also, I hate the fact that I have to say this, but for anyone watching this in post or anyone in the chat that took my comment the wrong way, just because I was reading The Hidden Hitler and Mein Kampf does not make me a Nazi sympathizer. I was
you're
curious.
priming up for adulthood. You're getting ready.
I was curious. It was a taboo, and back then, anything that was considered illicit, like I was never a kid that was into drugs, even though I did my fair share. For me, when people said that knowledge was illicit, it turned me onto it. And so I read everything that everyone told me that I shouldn't. So That's where that comes
I
from. I'm not a
mean,
Nazi.
that's impressive. I got like 10 pages into my conf, and I'm like, this is boring as fuck. Like, he just talks about the communists doing this and the
Oh yeah,
labor doing this and
there
means
there
of
are
production.
moments.
Oh my god,
There are
here we go.
moments. The thing is you have to read through it to find the moments. You
Unk
know.
is talking, as the kids would say. Unk is talking again.
Yep, exactly.
It just wasn't interesting. I couldn't sit through it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't necessarily that it was interesting, but I feel like from a psychological standpoint, I feel that it really spoke volumes to the mental state and capacity that Hitler was in prior to you know
Sure.
taking over Germany, and so it was just
Times
for
of
me it was
austerity.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just interesting. And then Hidden Hitler, the reason I read that is because Mein Kampf, my struggle, is more of like his perspective on himself and what he thinks should be happening in Germany. And then the Hidden Hitler is going down, either he was gay or bisexual, he hated art, but he was an artist himself, his grandmother was Jewish, all of these things that, come out about him that, he didn't want the public to know at the time.
Yeah.
So
I think it was kind of, anyway. My personal gleaning is I think he was kind of divergent, you know what I mean? Like highly neurodivergent.
oh yeah,
And
definitely.
you can tell by a singular focus. And I think once you analyze him personally, that's why you get all these like eccentricities.
Mm-hmm.
You start seeing these things that are inconsistent. But
Yep,
anyway,
exactly. So yeah, I just wanted to say that because I know somebody out there in the world is gonna like clip that and be like, "This guy's a Nazi." It's like, no, like reading something doesn't make you something. So
yeah,
yeah,
they're gonna take that clip of you saying you read Mein Kampf and they're gonna loop it and add like house music behind it, and then it'll trend on TikTok.
there you go. All right, one more question with the like kind of like the modern occult aspect of things here. So
Yeah.
Nietzsche's disdain for the herd mentality, right? How does that speak to the occultists surrounded by pop occult Instagram spirituality today?
These are good questions, Addis. You came with ammunition this morning. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah. Yes, that's that. There's again because you were because of the Manson reference in the intro. There's a line in um I believe it's in Hollywood. I forget what song it is. But he says I'll put down your disco and take your heart away. The idea of putting down your disco, the idea that it could become fashionable to deconstruct something of the time. And even Nietzsche could become fashionable. Even the decadents could become fashionable. And we're way past paganism and esotericism becoming the disco, right? That was in the 70s, and then it ebbs and flows and comes in waves. Now, how do we take the idea of dissidence? How do we take the idea of antinomianism that has always been a part of witchcraft, the witches' Sabbath, meeting in the forest clandestinely, worshiping the devil, and all the things the witches had experienced, the breaking of laws for the past 2,000 years, and now it seems to be this kind of pop sentimentalism. You know, when you really dig at these people, when you really dig into these figures, I think of one, bless her heart. I think she's just following what she'd like to do. But there's one that's really blown up over the last few years. Her name's Shannon Blake. And she kind of has dreads and she kind of does these little like lounge rappy songs and raps about her psychedelics and being pure and being always talking about how I'm not having negativity in my life. You're taking away from my presence. There's always a lot of me's with these people. It's so funny. They're talking about new age acceptance and love and universal love, but always in the next sentence is, I'm not going to let you pull me down. I'm not going to let you drain my energy is so delicious, everybody wants it. It's very it's very narc coded, you know. And like, if we look at that, let's really analyze what's dangerous about it. There's still conventional beauty standards, there's still mentioning psychedelics. I mean, that hasn't been faux pas in like 40 years. That's been popular. Like Eminem was talking about taking mushrooms and in the mid 90s, you know. So, and then even before that, like Terrence McKenna and things like that, who is a transgressive figure but brought it into the popular world. Psychedelics were discussed um far, you know, far before that in the 60s and 70s. So psychedelics isn't transgressive. Loving everyone, I mean, that's a message that's went back. That's not it's arguable today what is transgressive in that philosophy, this idea of humanism. But they're talking, you know, they're still talking this idea of, they're still pushing the mainstream narrative. There's nothing transgressive about it. I mean, I suppose I'd rather be surrounded by people than like really angry, aggressive, violent Christians or something, or some paramilitants. Like I'd rather be around some new age kind of narcissistic hippies, I guess. But there's nothing, they're not pushing against um the mainstream. They're not bucking against the system. Like it's not disturbing anything. There's nothing controversial about it. There's nothing antinomian about it. So yes, esotericism has went into this weird pop culture, consumerist, bizarre, self-help kind of shit, but it's hollowed out. It's multi-level marketing. It's boring. It's uninteresting. It doesn't bother anyone. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't buck against the system in any way. It doesn't buck against anyone. It feeds into this MLM gangster marketing strategy where you just turn as many people over as much as possible and make a dollar on it. Um, that's really it. It's not Nietzschean. It's not satanic. It's not antinomian. It's not unconventional. And it's not antagonistic towards culture in any way. Does it need to be? No, but that that is not the tradition carried over from the esotericists of the past and the occult of the past.
100%, 100%. Yeah, I mean, the question came about because you have, I feel like witchcraft in general, like LHP aside, has become very mainstream. It's become something that is almost expected of some people. Like when you look at somebody and they dress a certain way or they listen to certain music, it's almost like expected. It's almost like you can identify a Christian, like you can identify a witch the same way you can identify a Christian. And so I suppose, you know, the question comes about because Nietzsche has always been, you know, like, I mean, obviously the most famous one-liner from Antichrist, right, is God is dead. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of context to that. But the whole thing with him was not to be a part of the collective and not fall trap or prey to what everyone else says is acceptable. And so do we run the risk of Nietzsche becoming that trap?
Yeah, you know, the uh, the Gott ist dort, the God is dead, God is dead line. I think in what Nietzsche intended in uh Thus Spake Zarathustra specifically is he wanted us to be aware or to be cognizant that the central edifice of meaning has been lost. God, meaning we used to appeal towards this. God and its church used to represent every aspect of life, from being born to being dead, from illness, health, sickness, family, agriculture, economy, military, politics. Everything was theological. It was theocratic, and it was through the church. Nietzsche saw that this was coming to an end, that the very thing that created God in a Platonic sense was that we wanted a will to truth. So we had this urge to keep unfolding the world and its meaning, finding truth in the world. And God came a part of that monotheistic Christian monarchical model paradigm came from the will to truth. But what happens is if you keep digging, then material science became more and more material. And it ended up killing God. So the very same thing that gave rise to God in Nietzsche's mind also uh, disentangled him and unmade him. And um, that we're going to seek out meaning in other places. And that's what he feared. He feared we're going to continue to distract ourselves with something just as potent or even more so. Um, Alcoholism, narcoticism, not just substances, but of the mind, decadence. He would look at something like doom scrolling as a sign of of the last man, of nihilism that has impregnated our institutions, which he talked about in his time. So what's the fear in misreading Nietzsche or it becoming a bit blasé or becoming a bit, lackadaisical? Um I think the issue is what I think the issue in what you're presenting, I think the danger is that we just use Nietzsche to uh, promote our bullshit. So one, because that would be that would be that would be deeply unfortunate. That he always said one of his fears was that his voice would be used to contradict what he stood for. And um, I think, and I think we're going to end up talking about this later, but American Christianity is a very mutated development of the last since the evangelical age of the 1920s tent show evangelism. The Christianity in America today is a very unique interpretation of Protestantism, and it's not the Protestantism of the 17th or 18th century, that's for sure. It's its own strange, interesting, Christ is holding an assault rifle or a high powered bolt action rifle, as it were,
I like
and
that
we're kind
image.
of dancing around. And it's a very interesting mutated form of Christianity that we have here. So in that same sense, Christ has been used to deliver a vehicle that many would argue, not just scholars, but many Christians of the past would argue is a bizarre way and even contradictory way to interpret Christ's teachings. Um, the same could be done with Nietzsche, where you can use his powerful poetic prose to justify some radical bullshit. And I think that's the fear of any great poet and any great teacher who has been able to use the language to inspire is that um it could be used to do evil.
Hmm. Yeah, of course,
We
of
can talk
course.
about what evil means, but I'm saying evil for poetic reasons.
No, yeah, of course. So
We
this kind
love
of like,
evil, actually.
right? Well, we like the
No
dark.
offense to the evildoers, we actually like evil, so I didn't mean to offend anybody.
No, right? So Nietzsche's will to power, right, is often misunderstood. It isn't just domination, right? It's the drive to become, to expand beyond limitation. This, I feel, is the part that resonates the most with left-hand path magicians who see power not as control of others, but rather of their own sovereignty. Now, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, so his conception of the will to power was multi-dimensional, and sometimes it's uh, kind of, yeah, difficult to pin down in any one way, but it developed over time. First it was like the Dionysian will, and then became the will to power later. He was inspired by Schopenhauer, who described what a passive force called the will to life. And he was a disciple in a sense, or at least a student of Schopenhauer, in that he was inspired by him early on. Later, he did not like. Well, the will to life for Schopenhauer is this passive force that just leads us to want to propagate, to want to. There's only one thing we want. We want to subsist long enough to have children, make children, and continue and subsist life, sustain life. And there was this pessimism Nietzsche didn't like. He saw that as, that's it. We're locked into that. We can't do anything about it, and that is what life is, and nothing else has meaning outside of that. And Nietzsche was inspired by that because it was a aggressive refutation of everything, of all of the institutions at the time. So Schopenhauer was deeply controversial in that sense. Well, he took that and said, and wanted to think of a passive force, and said, yes, there is a force. Now we have to be careful with that word, because it's not necessarily metaphysical. It's kind of para metaphysical. And that is that there is this force that pushes us to dominate and acquire power. That's actually the will, the force that pushes through all things. And that Nietzsche saw that there is a way to kind of align oneself with this will to power, or to bring it to manifest. I got to be careful the words I use, to wield it, or to align oneself with it, or to acknowledge it, and let that become the foundation of his ethics. Now, whether the will to power was saw it as some sort of metaphysical force is still unclear. Nietzsche has a lot of ambiguities like that in his philosophy, but certainly, um, occultists would turn it into that. Now, the question you asked is, you asked if this is like a personal. Is this a personal force? I
Uh-huh.
forgot exactly.
So where your stance is, in the sense that it's more about domination to your own sovereignty rather than control of other
Ah,
people.
ah. Well, Nietzsche saw it, as, in that sense, sort of as morally, morally agnostic, in the sense that there is a natural law, and he saw nature itself as showing us what a hierarchy should be, and that, the strong should will out, and that the strong should be taken. The heroes, the warriors, should be the ones who rule society, as like a meritocracy. He contradicted institutions at the same time. He criticized uh, some of the peace movements. He criticized Christ's teachings as weakness, as the he called it chattel morality, the idea of a slave morality. So he did speak of elitism and domination, Nietzsche specifically. Um, but also spoke of applying it to himself. So Nietzsche himself talked about it in both ways: domination over the world and others, and domination over the self overcoming. That's how
Hmm.
Nietzsche saw it. Um, and I think it's both as well. I just don't think you have to choose to. You could choose to take it either way. It's morally agnostic. We decide how we channel that will to power.
I think I break away
Well,
from the
it
idea.
drives us, but also we can choose how to
Uh-huh.
channel it, I could
Of
say.
course. So I think I break away from the idea of control of others because of the my philosophy of no one can control me unless I allow them to control me, and therefore my ability to control anyone else is it's fantasy. Like it's you can control people in the sense that you can influence and kind of push them one way or push them this way, but at the end of the day, the decisions that they make are their own. So that's not true control. That's not puppeteering. So when we think of control,
Sure.
we think of puppeteering another human being into doing what we want them to do, and that's a fallacy. So I break away from that aspect of it and focus more solely on the control of self, understanding that my life is where it is because of me, and it is going where it's going because of me, and I am the only thing that I can control in my life. I can try to influence other people, but again, to confuse that with control is, I believe, is narcissistic. To think that you have the ability to literally puppeteer other individuals, which is why I break away from that idea of domination of the world, domination of others, plus the domination of self. I focus more on that aspect of the philosophy.
Yeah, and I personally think that's a far more constructive and a far more humanistic. I think it's a more Buddhistic way to approach things, and
Fair enough.
I personally align with that quite a bit more. Although um, I think we do exist in a world of opposing forces. I think there is times of competition, and no matter how humanistic or polite you want to be, there are forms of violence that exist in our society. It may not be physical violence, may not necessarily be psychological or social violence or things like that, but there are subtle forms of violence and the will to power that drives all interactions. Um, when we do business, when we interact with an employer, we interact with customers, or we interact with others in collaboration, there is a form of competition and hierarchy that seems to come out of the collaboration. It doesn't necessarily have to be it doesn't exactly have to be a forms of domination or anything like that. Sometimes it expresses itself as a more tranquil collaboration, and sometimes not so much that. But yeah, I think it's a good place to have things where you work on yourself, and I think your world does start to change when you focus specifically on self overcoming. Although I think there is a place, especially in the world as it is today, when um, a bit of Five of Swords comes into play. And those familiar with the tarot, the
Mm-hmm.
guy who wins, but at what cost? He's kind of holding his
Yeah.
swords, and the people are walking away, and he's like, "Damn, what I had to do to win," you know. And it's good to try to avoid those circumstances, but especially in today's time, we're going to be called to compete and defend and depose, and that's where the will to power is more outward, and is going to call for us to dominate.
Hmm. I mean, I think the outward control, I think, presents itself like inherently in such a way that, like, when you're not trying to do it, it becomes more natural. So like if you work on yourself and you become the best version of yourself for the time, and you're putting yourself into situations where people can see that you're giving off. I don't want to say energy, because that sounds like new agey and poppy and shit, but what it is that you're giving off from yourself, that confidence, that's a better word. People are attracted to confidence. People are attracted to people that are sure of themselves, and even if they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, sound like they do. Um, which is why we have people that mistakenly follow others into, like, the fucking flame, right? And burn alive. But I feel like when you do that work on yourself, when you focus on that, upgrading yourself, then everything else just kind of follows suit. Now, there's something I want to touch on. You mentioned master versus slave morality. So this is a point that I have to talk about, right? So my take on this, and I'm curious after I say my take, what your take is. So the way I look at slave morality weaponizes weakness into virtue, right? Meekness, obedience, things like that. So like the slave morality is that, in modern terms, I suppose it would be the professional victim would be the slave morality. And then master morality celebrates strength, creation, risk. And with the left-hand path, right, the fork in the road is, do you live as a creator or a resentful victim? So I'm curious where your stance on that is. It's mine, so I'm curious what
Crea-
yours is.
A creator or resentful victim in what respect?
So with the idea of the master and slave morality. So master morality would be that you are the
Sure.
creator, you take the risks, it
Sure.
celebrates strength, and then the
Right.
slave morality is, the resentful victim.
And you're asking which
Like
which
where,
road?
yeah, and like kind of like what your stance is on it, how you look. Because I know everybody interprets
Oh,
slightly a
I
little
see.
bit differently. So my
Yeah.
interpretation stands as that, but I'm curious what yours is.
Oh, I see. I see. I see now. Um, I don't necessarily agree with Nietzsche personally. I think a reading of Nietzsche is more or less clear. He was very dramatic in this, and he was sometimes you got to be dramatic and have a flash for performance. I'm not saying his work was performative, but I'm saying you have a flash of drama of the dramatic. A flair for the dramatic helps deliver a message, of course. And in his language, it was pretty clear. He saw the Titanic in the sense of the Titan of Greek mythology as superior to the Olympian gods. These they were closer to humans, just like we might in the left-hand path see diamonds or demons as closer to us and far more relatable and far more natural and far more aligned with man's nature, and above the angelic hosts. We'll see the Luciferian as more meaningful to us than the angelic, than the heavenly. Um, and he saw the appealing to strength, appealing to health, appealing to vitality, appealing to power, as a form of elitism and the master. And he saw the Buddhistic, he saw the passive, he saw the socialistic of his time as just variations of Christianity and weakness, just like LaVey very much saw hippies and would see, what we might call raves and plur, peace, love, unity, respect, as a form of hippies, as a form of the Christianity of Nietzsche's time, not the Christianity of our time, the Christianity of Nietzsche's time, as all these forms of passivity, of weakness, of being trodden down, of nonviolence, um, and that's how he saw it. And I I don't, in a time of war, in a time of might is right, in a time of tribalistic war and tribalism, yeah, maybe that makes sense. The person with the spear or the assault rifle and enough weapons is going to win. That's not the world I want us to live in. I want us to live in a world that is a more holistic meritocracy, where yes, things like athletics and strength and aptitude and skill, but also intellectualism and thought, and scientific inquiry and poeticism and art is also a weaponry, is also your assault rifle. Um, Now, what's very interesting is, whenever we transition to talking about modern politics, but it's impossible not to reference this. It's very clear to many that see that this kind of might is right elitism has injected itself into Christianity itself. Nietzsche would be I'm not saying he'd be confused. He would just think this is advanced nihilistic, where now his Greek, his Dionysian, Titanic elitism has somehow fused with the very thing that is the opposite of it, and they've kind of become this singular force. I think he would see this as an incredibly bizarre development, of how things has come. I don't think he would like it. I don't think he would necessarily like it,
Hmm.
at
I agree. I
all.
agree. I feel like.
But yeah, I think human. Sorry. One thing
No,
on
go
that.
ahead.
I think this collaborative competition thing has its place, but I much more feel that some sort of collective communalistic world is far more preferable to a constantly warring one. Microbes and single cell organisms have been warring 2 or 3 billion years
Hmm.
ago. I eat you and consume you. I don't think, as humans with poetry, I don't think, and science and astronomy, I don't think we should continue to act like that for the next 10,000 years. You know what I mean?
I mean, I agree. I mean, I think for me, so this is more kind of like personal philosophy that ties into the whole master slave morality thing. I think this utopian concept of kind of essentially what you're describing is very utopian in nature, and unfortunately
Oh, it's
ignores human
constant
nature.
warring. Constant warring is utopian.
So, I mean, I suppose it depends on your perspective. But when we think utopian, generally speaking, we think peace, we think love, we think everybody gets along and everything's great all the time, and there's no problems, and nobody feels any negativity in the modern sense of how people understand utopia. And so I think that this concept doesn't take into account human nature. The reptilian brain is a very powerful aspect of human nature, and the hammer smash face, to quote Cannibal Corpse here, is a part of our programming. It just is. And this idea that we're ever going to live in a society that has evolved, at least us in our lifetime, that has psychologically, mentally, physically evolved past the point of our own self-destruction, it doesn't exist. I don't see it. Like, I mean, I don't
I
know. Like,
yeah. No, I understand your perspective, and I think there's some aspects I agree with, but there's some aspects that I don't. And I if we look at our evolution, and we look at our ancient ancient biological predecessors, they the consensus has come to that, yes, chimpanzees are probably closer to where we were in our early development, but also the bonobos. And the bonobos are completely opposite of chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are, you pissed me off. This child came from another woman. I'm going to rip it apart and eat it. Okay, fine. Chimpanzees. Bonobos, though, were like just all fucking each other and hugging and loving. And two tribes will run into two tribes, and then they'll two packs, and then they'll all have sex with each other and then leave and sometimes merge. And I think, and the science there is what it is, and we could trust the studies in whatever way we do. But if you look at human beings, you can see that it's clear we're a combination of those two forces. um it's yes, it is true that we look at nature around us, and for the most part it's rather brutal and vicious. But you do see examples. It's somewhat a minority, but you do see examples of dolphins just I don't know, stick in each other's air holes, and they're bisexual and they're running around, but they also do some kind of torturous things as well. So to be fair, but um, dolphins don't also build telescopes and look at Saturn. They also
true.
don't develop antibiotics, and the amount of tool making and future conceptualizing, we're able to envision future concepts that to such a degree above our animal peers, that we should also know that if I hurt these people, it's not going to be good for me. Like, we can look ahead and we can conceptualize and build rockets. We should also morally and ethically be able to do that. And we do. We have massive, undeniable examples of modern society that actually show we can create cohesion and collaboration. I think we're sensitive to the fucked up things that are happening, because of we're now universally aware of it, and it's good that we feel things are bad. We should feel that things are bad. That's the bonobo. That's the bonobo monkey that says we don't want this to happen. So yeah, I look, if we can use hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars to build weapons and create wars and do all this thing, we can certainly go the other direction. We have it in us. Right now, I would say we're living a wartime utopia unnaturally. I think we are putting far more resources into warring and opposition, and that's utopian. See, utopia doesn't necessarily mean a peaceful kind of hippie, new agey kind of thing. There's a libertarian utopia. There's a capitalist utopia. And to be honest, I feel some of the things we're experiencing now is a kind of libertarian utopia. Is we've built a system that on an ideology, and that's what we're seeing right now, at least in the
Oh, and
United States.
I agree with you. I mean, and my statement isn't to say that universally human beings, we're just designed to kill each other. But I will never omit the fact that for some reason there always turns around. There's always someone that wants chaos for chaos' sake. That they don't have a rhyme or a reason or a necessity or, and no, I'm not quoting Batman, but if it fits, it fits.
Sure.
There is, whether it's a world leader, whether that's a serial killer, whether that's, whatever, there's always a presentation of someone in society, multiple people, that it's just chaos. That's what they want. They thrive off of that chaos. They thrive off of that destruction, and watching the pillars fall, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I feel like to sit there and ignore that part that exists makes us potential victims to it instead of being prepared for it.
I agree. However, nature. So there's a nature and nurture element. I think if you create a society where we lift up the bottom, we kind of put some limitations to the top, and so that no one can run amok and kind of disrupt the system. No one man can completely disrupt the system, and we can kind of create a collective accord. And so there may be people who have traumatic events that happen because of times of war and civil war that could traumatize. Look at the kids growing up in Gaza right now. I don't imagine they're going to have very balanced lives if they survive to adulthood. And in Ukraine and so on, and in the inner cities here. I grew up in a very poor part of LA. Everyone fucking around me was traumatized. This because of this environment, I am not exempting myself from this. Because of that's why I'm here right now. Because of that's why I'm on this podcast with Adius Day. Because if you remove those things, so you can create a society that's much more in accord. Someone loses their parents, they end up having some sort of problem in their youth or growing up, and then you have a system that comes in and kind of lifts them up and gives them a support system. You're going to remove some of those psychopathic, antisocial things. You can minimize them. Now, anyone who there was a series, I don't watch much TV, but I was dating a girl that really loved the true crime stuff. I try to stay out of it because I can be too influenced by that stuff. The true crime stuff is fucking everywhere, and that could be a symptom of nihilism as well. But there was one called I think Evil Lives Here, I think it was called. And if you look at some of those people, yeah, some of them were abused. Some of them were sexually abused. Some of them grew up in a weird but some just clicked over. And then they're like 16 years old and they're like, yeah, I think I want to cut my mom's head off and stab my sister to death. They just click over. Yeah, I think my understanding is that unless we got into some sort of eugenics, unless we got into some sort of genetic altering, that those deviations and mutations are always going to come up. It's true. I agree with you. What to do is, one, with science we can, and it's very controversial, but we could probably start tweaking that so those don't happen anymore. But if you take out that side of it, um, I think evolution tests the boundaries. I think that's how evolution works. I think it's going to create these kind of deviations and mutations in order to test the boundaries of the species and of life. So I think those are always going to come up. It's identifying them early and not creating a system where one psychopath can end up creating a nationwide cult, or having too much power, or owning a multinational corporation. With the psychopath can just get mad with his garden tools, and then we kind of have to shake him down and put him in a room until we can figure out what to do with him. Like,
Which is preferable.
yeah, right. Just Johnny, 12-year-old Johnny is like burning things in the backyard and killed a squirrel and wetting his bed. We have to keep an eye on him.
Yep.
Like, because we see, we don't want him shooting up a school or doing something else. So,
I
we
mean,
just need a
and
system that looks at mental health and takes it seriously.
I completely agree with that, and I'm a big proponent for the Second Amendment. In New York State, I own guns, plenty, and I was bullied as a kid, and a lot of the things that you mentioned as far as abuse and trauma, I've experienced most of my life. I had the shit kicked out of me by my stepdad. I mean, we made up, like, when he died, I very much looked at him like my father, but, growing up, there was a lot of violence. There was sexual abuse. There's a lot of that happened. I never, not once, ever in a single second, ever considered taking my grandfather's guns and going to school. Like, that never crossed my mind. That was never an option. Like, that was never a thing, and, I'm just like,
it's interesting when you say that. Yeah. I was bullied really hard. And, but, my father was a Vietnam vet, and, but he wasn't a gun guy, he was a classical, uh, he was a JFK liberal, or like eventually a Clinton liberal, socially liberal,
mm-hmm.
economically liberal, working class Irish, the Irish working class. Um, so it didn't really have guns. It wasn't a gun culture. He grew up in the cities, grew up in the cities for the most part. My mom grew up on farms for part of her life, but we didn't have guns. But I got to tell you, with the way I was getting picked on, I was terrified going to school. I was terrified of imminent physical violence. I never thought about this up to this moment, surprisingly. But if guns were available, I can't tell you what I would have done, which is interesting. I can't tell you.
Hey,
I mean, I was fucking terrified. I was terrified, and I was violently picked on. I got my ass kicked. And I felt there was no one at home, outside of home, that was going to protect me. So I'm just glad I didn't have guns around. But I did have knives around, like kitchen knives. And I didn't bring those to school. So I just got magic. I just got the occult and used that to try to help me. I was deathly afraid of violence, until I realized I had to learn how to do it and how to defend myself later in life. But yeah, anyway, you got me thinking about some things.
Yeah, I was completely different. Like, I think because of my home life and the fact that I felt like I couldn't do anything at home. Like, yeah, I got picked on and I got my ass beat at school, but I would also pick fights. And when I would pick fights, I would always find somebody bigger than me. And I would always pick a fight. I would always get my ass kicked. Like, always get my ass kicked. Like, I would get the living shit kicked out of me. But I would always pick a fight. I would pick a fight. I would go to some jock smoking a cigarette in the smoking street, and I would literally just smack him in the back of the head with a fucking book and go at it and get the living shit kicked out of me. Or say something stupid, and like, I was never afraid of it. And like, I always felt like the only way that I could overcome it was by throwing myself into the middle of it.
Yeah.
Obviously my fighting skills never got better. So
No, that would have saved me some trouble if I felt more proactive as you. I was often the victim of violence, but one out of every 3 or 4 encounters, I would finally fight back because I was pushed into such a corner. I was forced to fight back, and I won those. So
there
when
you
I would
go.
finally be pushed into a corner, and I had literally no other choice, I would fight. And I did win those. And then when I got brutally beaten in 2008 by some skinheads. I got brutally beat down. Um, my life was endangered. I did learn to fight after that. So now I've got a few years of Muay Thai and some Krav Maga and things like that. So I'm a little bit better. Um,
Krav Maga is something I want to get
and
into. Muay Thai I've got, ninjutsu, jujitsu I've got those. Krav Maga, that's very interesting to me.
Krav Maga is very situational, and you often can't spar with Krav Maga because it relies on eye gouges and breaking bones as fast as possible and hurting them as fast as
That's
possible,
why it's interesting to
and
me.
a lot of kill moves. If you look at Muay Thai and BJJ, it's some of these are for competition and it talks about holding them back and striking them here and striking them there. Krav Maga goes, this is how you hold their neck to kill them. And this is what you do with the hand to break it. And this is how you make them blind. You know, Krav has a desperate, that was the first thing I gravitated towards. Um, after I'd gotten brutally beaten, I I remember going into Google and put most brutal form of martial arts. And Krav Maga frequently came up, so that was the first one I got into. Uh, but then I gravitated towards Muay Thai. Muay Thai is more fun, and there's more fitness to it. I like striking. Like a lot of the holds, I'm not good at. I'm not really good. That's why I'm not interested in BJJ either. Like a lot of the ground holds and the holding, I could never get right, and I always feel in the heat of battle, you're not gonna like that. I don't feel like that's going to really go well. So you're probably good with going to strikes unless you've mastered a lot of these various holds and things like that. Muay Thai is a lot of fun. I love striking.
Muay Thai was painful when I started learning it. Um,
Oh yeah, totally, totally. You get injured. I mean, there's a higher chance of getting injured in Muay Thai.
like, I mean, I
Here I am with
remember.
like 20-year-olds, and I've got to try to hold my own, dude. I'm unk on
Like,
the mat, dude.
well, so the thing is like, I went to this place here in Mexico. I mean, I learned a little bit of it back in the States, and then I wanted to keep going with it. And so there's this dojo called Frank Kicks. And I went there. A stupid fucking name, but the guy was good. He did competitions and stuff. And so he saw that I knew a little bit, but he's like, yeah, your kicks are weak. So he put me on the heavy bag, and he stood me there all day with one leg, one kick. I wasn't allowed to switch legs to kick the heavy bag all day. And he's like, until you get 10,000 kicks in, you're not allowed to switch your leg over. And I swear to God, I went home that day.
Is he Thai?
He is.
That's a very trad. That's a very trad approach. Is like do the same kick for fucking hours until you get it right. Yeah.
No, my leg was fucked, dude. It was bleeding. It was, and then he made me clean off the bag after the end, like the end of the day. And he didn't do like hours. Like he didn't like, you're paying for an hour. Like I paid him, and he's like, make sure that like you're here until I tell you can go. And so it would only be like a weekend thing, because obviously I had to work. But yeah, I did that, and yeah, my legs are still like, I still can barely feel shit in my legs. So
I think physical activity like that just hopefully we don't get into fights, right? But they happen from time to time. If you're out in the world and you're interacting with the world, fights do happen. There's ways to diffuse them, but sometimes they do, and it is what it is. But just for personal talk, you're talking about self overcoming. Just for personal, just what
mm-hmm.
you described right now. very Nietzschean, is bettering the self, evolving the self, becoming, so that Adius now, from the Adius that did the 5,000 kicks later, um, you've now destroyed that old one, and now the
Yeah.
newer one has become greater than the one before. That's why I think mixed martial arts is important, far more important there and for health, especially as you get in your 30s and 40s, then and later. Then the world's gonna go to. We gotta be ready. I mean, sure, okay,
Yeah. I mean,
but
I
there's
will say after
apocalypse
that,
porn. You know, the apocalypse
yeah.
porn up part of
I mean, I will say that after that, my mentality definitely switched over after about like 2 years with him. Because I went full 2 years with him. I try to diffuse situations instead of going head into it like I used to. Because like very shortly before that, I had gotten to a fight at a concert. I went to a concert with somebody, and there's a group of kids behind me, probably like 16, 17, that just kind of kept kicking my chair. I was like 20 at the time, I think, 20, 22. And they just kept kicking my chair. And I turned around, I was like, hey, can you stop kicking my chair? And they did it again. I turned around, can you stop kicking my chair? And he did it a third time. And I've always been that 3 strikes and you're out kind of person. And I literally picked him up and threw him over into the chair in front of me. And I said, I told you to stop fucking kicking my chair. And then the person I was at the concert with, like, yep, we got to go.
Sure.
And it was after that, it was like 6 months after that I went to this guy, because like in my own head, I was like, there's something wrong. Cause I just popped off on this kid.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. The thing about fights is they're incredibly chaotic, and sometimes you have to know when to take an L, in the sense that you have to know when to walk away before you inject yourself into the chaotic dynamic of a fight. You were young, you were 2022. In that situation, like, you know, like I said, fights can get chaotic no matter how well you know how to fight. Someone can throw a stray punch that lands right, and now you're permanently disabled.
Yep.
Or like my Krav teacher used to say, assholes come in clusters. So you are often probably going to be facing multiple opponents, and you don't know how far they will go. A lot of like botched robberies. People get killed in botched robberies. A lot of these people don't have shit to lose. A lot of these people willing to jump to violence, they don't have a lot to lose. They've been in prison before. Like the people that jumped me, I thought about it. This one prison motherfucker, in 2008, um, he uh I was a tiny scrawny goth kid at that time, and he just grabbed me by my throat, and he pounded me in the head for like 2 to 3 minutes. And I thought I was gonna die. And I thought about, now, okay, now I know how to fight a bit, right? And I thought, what if I fought him today? And the reality is I might be in more danger. And that is because if I started throwing punches, and if I didn't get him out as quickly as possible, he probably then would have killed me. You know what I mean? Because now I'm a
Mm-hmm.
threat. So that's that very kind of contradictory thing with knowing how
Yeah.
to fight, is that in this case now, yeah, unless I put him down immediately, he probably would have went through with it. Rather than, I'm just kind of throwing this kid around, I'm just going to steal his boots and dash. So that is I think the crucial key to the concept of violence itself. It's just like magic. It's completely chaotic. You don't always know how it's going to resolve, but you can prepare yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
I mean, to the effect, I also
ultimately,
want to
and
make,
that ties into our conversation, because the will to power
yes.
is a chaotic force.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that, I'm not talking about that incident because I'm proud of it. I'm quite the opposite, actually. I'm not proud of how I handled the situation.
You deserve to get thrown. I bet he stopped kicking people's chairs after that.
Probably. And I don't know why he was doing it. I probably should have handled it a little bit better. But it happened. It went the way that it went, and I learned from it. And the thing is I'm I know a lot of people don't like this individual, but I am going to quote Jordan Peterson here. I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson, and as people, I'm not going to say men, but as people, we need to be capable and of great cruelty and understand the levels of cruelty that we're able to go to and make the conscious decision not to, because that is what makes us peaceful people. If you're not a threat and you choose to not be a threat, there's nothing there, but it doesn't make you peaceful. It just makes you harmless. And if you are capable and understand your cruelty and the levels of cruelty that you're capable of going to, and you make a choice not to do that, that is what makes you peaceful. So,
Sure.
so the next part,
And also,
that I want to get into. Go ahead.
Also, if people talk about climate change, you should cry on command. That's also what Jordan Peterson has taught us. I like Jordan Peterson from like 2013 when he was doing lectures on Nietzsche and philosophers and alcoholism and things like that.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson 2024, 2025. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't watched him in a long time.
But what you quoted, I do agree with that. I think what the right wing has done well, at least in the United States, is this idea of getting one's, at least in philosophy, getting one physical training, aptitude training with guns, fortunately or unfortunately. And I think that's one thing the left in America needs to take a lesson from. And it is slowly, like, there are a lot of people on the left are becoming more gun aware. Like, if they're going to have them, we need to have them. But
I think it also teaches you
I think
control.
no matter where you are in the spectrum, this is the world we live in.
Yep.
And you need to learn how to fight. You need to learn how to take care of your body. You need to learn to become mentally strong, and you have to be, and that's going to grow your confidence. It's going to grow your message, and it's going to grow your art of who you are. So
Yes.
I think physical training is absolutely important. Learning how to fight is important. Learning how to use guns, even if you don't trust yourself with one. Learning how to use them, learning how to understand that language is important. Because unfortunately, we're not in a time of peace. Well, comparatively in history, we are, but yeah, we're in a time when we do have to have some preparation. Just don't pray for a civil war or something like that. Don't have your apocalypse porn. Don't give into apocalypse porn.
So the next part that I want to get into, and guys, I don't know if I told you guys at the beginning of this is going to be a longer podcast. We're about halfway through now. The next parts are we're going to kind of roll through them pretty quickly. So the next part is something that I personally went through because I'm a huge fan of Carl Jung and I'm a huge fan of Nietzsche. And so going through this, I really wanted to see the crossovers with this. And judging by Shea's the look on his face when I mentioned it at the beginning, he's kind of had a curious look. So I'm looking forward to this part of the conversation. So I didn't know this, but apparently Jung was actually a fan of Nietzsche. A lot of what he built as far as a psychological system, there are aspects pulled from Nietzsche. I didn't know this until I started looking it up yesterday. So Jung absorbed, I'm going to go over a few points that I have here, and then I have a few questions, direct questions, but we can just kind of talk about this. So Jung absorbed Nietzsche, but turned it towards integration instead of destruction. So Nietzsche fell into madness, but Jung turned madness into method. So if you look at like the Red Book, active imagination, stuff like that, there's apparently a lot of influence from Nietzsche with those. And taking the idea of destruction into integration instead of projecting pulling it inward and integrating it into yourself to become a better version of yourself. I didn't realize that that ideal had anything at all to do with Nietzsche, but apparently it did. And the whole madness idea was that Nietzsche went crazy, and what Jung wanted to do was, instead of going that route, was to create something that was a method that people could use to avoid that. I didn't know any of this. I have sources, so I can provide everybody sources if you're curious of the crossover here. So that was one point. The next one is both saw the necessity of facing the abyss. Nietzsche with the, I can never pronounce this fucking thing, Dionysian. Jung with the shadow, right? So both focused on kind of like looking into the abyss. Jung's individuation is equal to Nietzsche's becoming. Both reject conformity and demand confrontation with chaos. So both philosophies line up there. And then the last point that I want to make is the left-hand path is essentially, after looking all this stuff up, is like a Nietzschean Jungian fusion. Like, destroy false idols, integrate the abyss, emerge sovereign.
Yeah, I think Sigmund Freud also was deeply inspired by Nietzsche as well, and you can see that reflected in his work and his look into psychological framework and how the subconscious plays a role in our behavior and our dreams and our visions and things like this. With Jung, Jung definitely takes the, Nietzsche used a concept, especially in Birth of Tragedy, with his Dionysian versus the Apollonian. He talked in the talk of the will to power, and he talked about decadence as these forces or these constructs. He also talked about Greek tragedy, and he talked about the Titanic, the Titans, and embodying Greek tragedy, and the Dionysian will, the Dionysian force. So I think Jung was the natural progression of talking about these constructs as things that influence and affect the world and affect society and affect behavior. There was also the Jung also saw some of the gods as constructs as well, and gave a kind of pseudo metaphysical ontology to them.
Yep.
Um, and it just took kind of Nietzsche's ideas and took them a little, kind of changed them a bit and deepened them. I mean, Nietzsche did the same with like the. I was recently at the Castle Drachenfell near Cologne, where the Nibelungenlied
Mm-hmm.
story was inspired, and also Wagner's symphony was based upon. And Nietzsche was a big fan of that because he saw that he was a big fan of Wagner in the beginning because he saw that he was giving light to or manifesting a lot of these ideas in his philosophy and promoting them and endorsing them on in an artistic form. Here's these heroes of our past. Here's these symbols of strength. Here's the warrior and the knight against the evildoer, and this is the best of man, and this is the role models towards strength, not the pallid rotting corpse on the cross. We're not looking up to this weak martyr. We're looking to this strong knight that fights the great evil, fights the great fight and wins, and it is a role model to strength. It's a monolith of strength. And Jung also looked to the pagan gods as constructs that we can that like a Jungian archetype that we can kind of draw a character from or draw spirit from. we could allow it to we could allow these forces to align within us and align within our lives. We could channel the Jungian archetype of Odin, or of Thor, or of Lucifer. uh, so I think that's where, as far as the left hand path and occultists are concerned, that's where that I think
Crossover
that
happens.
merger is most obvious.
Well, let me ask you a question then. So we're talking about Freud and we're talking about Jung, and kind of like their inspiration from Nietzsche. So there was a concept that I saw with like looking at Jungian psychology, um, or looking at Nietzsche through a Jungian lens. Um, do you think that it would be safe to say or see Jung as almost like Nietzsche's healer? So kind of like making his philosophy workable for the psyche.
I would say in some way made it a lot more practical, like a lot more pragmatic form, or interpretation that was a lot more pragmatic than Nietzsche's philosophy. N- One thing that Nietzsche lacked in his writings and in his thought is um, actionable items.
Hmm.
Not a lot of things that were clearly actionable. Just a lot of critique, a lot of dire warnings, a lot of aggressive deconstruction, but not a lot of this is what you must do. Here's the steps to take. That's why there's a lot of arguments how to interpret Nietzsche's work. With Jung, it seems his concepts, the Jungian concepts, seem a lot more, like I said, a lot more pragmatic, a lot more practical, or something that you could ingest a lot easily, intellectually and spiritually.
Okay. So to that effect, then with how I see kind of like the way that you're talking about Jung, do you think Jung, there's a lot of Jung in, like, a lot of people talk about Carl Jung in the left hand path. Now I'm curious because, you, for example, you even mentioned kind of like how aggressive Nietzsche is with his, execution of how he talks about things. Do you think Jung is too soft for the left hand path? Or like, does his psychology make Nietzsche survivable for modern practitioners?
No, I don't even think. I think there's a place in the left-hand path for uh, some Buddhistic thought. I think there's place in the left-hand path. I mean, if we look at the term left-hand path, it comes from Vamachara, and it kind of got some parts of it: spiritual antinomianism, spiritual individuation, or divine individuation. These are all concepts that did get carried over when it came to the West. But the idea of asceticism has a place in the left hand path. The idea of humanism has a place in the left hand path. There's even a place for powerlessness in the left hand path, both traditionally ancient and today. Forms of Gnostic Luciferianism or Gnosticism talks about asceticism, and there's a place for that. There's what I've said over the years is, um, within the left hand path contains all things, both darkness and light, and we need not seek it elsewhere. That is to say, that the left hand path contains all these things. So Jung absolutely has a place. Ayn Rand has a place. Nietzsche has a place. Um, Jesus Christ has a place. But I say that tongue in cheek. Buddha has a place. So you know, hedonism, decadence, but asceticism, elitism, social Darwinism. Now, that some people hearing that might go, well, then what does it mean if it has everything? Well, it's just the left hand path is a way. The left hand path
An overlay.
is a is an overlay, or it's a paradigm, or it's a modality, and then things can come into it. People who've uh, it's like an emulator. It's like when you think of emulators for games, you have an emulator that can play various ROMs or play various games, or an emulator in any other sense. But we're child of the '90s. Emulators come to mind for me,
Same,
and
same.
through it, through it, it interprets and plays the code of a particular thing. So the left-hand path becomes this emulator on which other ideologies can then have a place. So as an example, what is the left-hand path in Christianity? Well, we could look towards a Gnostic Christianity that sees the creator of the world as a tyrant, maybe the God of the Old Testament. That would be possibly, and then says, you know what, we're going to now look at. I talk about Jakob Frank I talk about the Frankist movement in my course, and I've taught it in some of my lectures. This was the Frankist movement decided that it was God's command or Yahweh's command that they must defy the Torah. So that's a left-hand path Jewish movement where antinomianism and defying the laws become becomes an affirmation of it. In Buddhism, I talk about this in my book. The idea of demonic Zen or crazy Zen. In Zen Buddhism, there's the transgression of the Buddhist precepts. So that in order to understand the boundaries of Buddhistic law, you must break those laws to understand where they are and to affirm them and make them stronger. That's a left-hand path Buddhism. So right, and then we can get really interesting and say, well, what does a right-hand path Satanism look like? And these do exist. Some might even argue, in a sense, that the Satanic Temple is a right-hand path Satanism, or even the Star of Azazel, the work of Johannes Nephastos, could be a right-hand path Satanism. So,
You're the
but
only
those
other
terms,
person I know.
they get
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I have to say this before I
no, it's
forget.
okay.
You're the only other person that I know, other than myself, that has labeled the Church of Satan as right-hand path Satanism. For me, that is exactly what they are.
You mean the Satanic Temple
No, I said
or the
that
Church of Satan?
the Church of Satan.
The Church of Satan, I still consider left-hand path. So Ansel LaVey, the Church of Satan, the Satanic Temple.
I mean, both of them I would
Um,
consider right-hand path. And the reason is I feel like the Church of Satan has left Anton's philosophies to the wayside. Like, it's the basis of the church, but I feel like the church itself no longer practices or puts into practice, LaVey's principles, and they're just in it for the money. Like, it's like you can pay to have a membership, and
yeah,
then that's it.
yeah. My arguments for the Church of Satan is that they took out a lot of the spark. They really tried to downplay any sort of the occult aspects. They're kind of now today, they just have a Twitter account that just gives these kind of centrist takes on everything, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
it's not interesting. And
Exactly,
but
right-hand
some of the
path.
but no, but yeah, ostensibly though, they're still about this elitism, isolationism, kind of social Darwinistic kind of might is right thing. It's just not really put into action. The Satanic Temple, with Lucien Greaves at the helm, they kind of have a Satan represents compassion and love and nonviolence, and after school we should go to after school club, and we should teach kids how to the coloring books, and there's a place for that. There's a place for that. There's a place for compassion in the left-hand path, but that's where it gets very confusing, because left-hand path and right-hand path they're not very good to categorize things. Actually, it's
They're
it's
not.
really just good to say as like a label to say the left-hand path has these religions in it, but just when you start applying it to morality and things like that, it gets very
Murky.
it gets murky, and it's not very useful.
Mm-hmm.
So But if we're playing around and for fun, we could say, yeah, maybe the Satanic Temple is right hand path Satanism. Maybe that's why I say Johannes Nephasos and the Star of Azazel, because he teaches a very humanistic, morally Christian, like a Christian type morality. So one might be able to arguably say that's right hand path. But anyway, it's yeah.
So with the young stuff, I got one more question
Oh
within
yeah, right. So
the
ultimately, I do
go
think
for it.
all these things have a place in the left hand path.
Uh-huh. So I got one more question, then we're going to be going into the stuff, the elephant in the room after this question. So how do you think occultists could best, like, looking at, like, Nietzsche, like maintaining the fire that Nietzsche had in their beliefs, but also using tools that were provided by Jung? So for me, like, what immediately comes up is like dream work, active imagination, stuff like that. How would you think, like, or would you guide an occultist in balancing those two aspects?
Yeah. I think also the Jung's concept of atavism is also interesting. It reminds me of the will to power as well. Just this idea that traits that came from previous culture can then manifest in society today. It makes me think of, and I'll give an example of how this can apply to occultism. I look at, for a while, Santa Muerte was central to my practice for a time, around 2014 to 2018. And if you look at Santa Muerte's, right where you are actually, in Mexico, it was around the early 20th
Mm-hmm.
century, like 1910, 1920. She started to become a folk saint. And it kind of, I don't know if recent studies have been done, but at the time that that I was a devotee, she, uh, it seemed like she kind of appeared from the groundwork there 1910, 1920 in in Central America and Mexico specifically. But then there's ideas that there was a a death goddess um within Aztec culture hundreds of years before, that maybe that impulse towards uh, edifying death or venerating death or someone symbolizing death came again. So this would be a very Jungian idea, the Jungian archetype of death. And I would think of, I thought about this early on, the work of Dietrich Soderlund and Michael Moynihan with Lords of Chaos. And in the book, talks about the concept of resurgent atavism, that these black metal musicians and the highest standard of living in the world in Norway, middle class kids, suddenly end up taking on this incredibly violent movement, the second wave black metal, true Norwegian black metal, um, Oystein Arseth and Varg Vikernes and so on and so forth. And um, said that it was kind of like, it thought of the Vikings and how the Viking raids, they would ride into a town clamoring their drums and screaming, and they would put on this death paint, and they would ride into a town and set it on fire. And the author drew a similarity that this is how the black metal, they have their corpse paint, they're playing their loud clamoring music, they're setting things on fire. What are they setting on fire? They're oddly enough setting these old pagan churches, the Stav churches, that have now been appropriated for Christian use. They're setting these on fire. The symbols have come to life. And I think the Jungian analysis would say that these are archetypes from an occultist standpoint. If we can understand archetypes as things that might have a life of their own and could exist in the world, like pyramids can be an archetype that we just uh, we have a fixation towards this form. So there's pyramids in North Africa, and then there's pyramids in South and Central America, and then this we can think of the pyramid becomes this archetype, and that it can come to life, and we could channel this type of understanding. So with Santa Muerte, with the Vikings, with black metal, with the Nordic gods, we could see the god of Tyr could be holding dominion over us. The god Yahweh, Yahweh as a tribal war god, could be holding dominion over the states at this moment. This tribal god of war, right? That archetype is we can see it as manifesting in our culture, that these archetypes have power, whether metaphysical or not, that it is something that can be drawn upon. So the occultist, I think, the way that they can appropriate or ingest or align Jungian Jungian metaphysics into their practices just as that, understanding that these things carry power, these symbols carry power, and they can be used for that reason and in that way.
I agree with you. I agree. I agree. And that's actually, with a couple of things that you said, there's a perfect transition into the next part, which is political violence, assassination, and anti-LHP collapse, is what I'm calling the section. Not very, memorable, but, it does the job. So for the last 10 years, I felt that
This is a very structured conversation, by the way. Sorry to interrupt. This is a lot of structure. I'm not used to this much structure in an interview or podcast or conversation. You took a lot of notes and so, thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, the thing was is
direction.
getting into Nietzsche and all of this, and with what we're going to get into now, I felt like there needed to be, like we needed to kind of like it's structured, and we're going on 2 hours now. So if we let our minds run rampant, this thing would go for 4 hours. Right. So. Yeah, I did structure this one more than I usually do, and I did take a lot of notes because I'm not well versed in Nietzsche. I'm a fan of Nietzsche. I know Nietzsche. I read a lot of Nietzsche as a kid, but for this particular one, I needed to make sure that I came prepared with someone that has written a fucking book about Nietzsche and the left-hand path. So,
Sure.
Thank
you, brother.
Yeah, no, thank you. Now, what I've noticed in the last 10 years, and this isn't in my notes, this is just based off of something you just said. I feel like lines are being drawn and sides are collecting bodies over the last 10 years in American political culture. And unfortunately, that political culture inherently drives a line into spirituality. Because most, if not all, on the right are Christians or Catholics or some, version of. And the left is a little bit more freestyle with it. Like some are atheists, some are LHP, some are Wiccan, some are Buddhists, some are whatever. But I feel like there is this kind of tribalistic divide that has been slowly happening over the last 10 years, and especially in the culture in America currently, where it's like if you slightly are averted to one side's philosophy, you're not welcome on that side. And I'm not saying, I want everybody to understand something here. This isn't a political podcast. We're not getting into politics. We're getting into the philosophy of the politics here. We're going to get into the spiritual allocation of the politics here. This is not about the politics. I don't give a fuck what side you're on. I really don't. So don't come in here trying to defend one side or the other, because I don't fucking care. Everyone is guilty, and this is just something that at large and in mass has been happening in the United States. That there has been this giant divide, and there's little subsections inside each side, but it's just, you mentioned it, you were talking about it, like we're talking about war culture, we're talking about Santa Muerte, you're talking about kind of like the Jungian concept, of how to kind of like the separation between sides and stuff like that. And it's like I had this vision in my head of, like almost like a high school dodgeball team. Like, yeah, I want this person on my team. Yeah, and I want that person on my team. And I want this person on my team. And I feel like people like you and I are kind of like the last pick because nobody fucking wants us because we're more centric than anything else, you know? So to that effect, right? Nietzsche warned of nihilism, right? When, you know, God is dead, values collapse, political violence is the proof of this collapse. It's a scramble for artificial meaning through bloodshed, is what I view political violence as. And with Jung warned of projection. We cast our shadow onto the other. Today, both left and right demonize each other and dehumanize each other to justify violence. And each one says that it was provoked by the other and tries desperately to justify, you know, actions being taken. And again, I'm not specifically saying one side did this, one side did. Both sides have fucked up across the board over the last 10 years, right? Nobody is innocent. Nobody is a shining example of innocence and centric values and belief of, you know, the value of human life. We have dehumanized each other so much that we don't see each other as human beings. We see each other as obstacles to be overcome. And it's a disgusting way to think, in my personal opinion. And this assassination of Charlie Kirk, I find as a symptom of this sickness. Whether you loved or hated him doesn't matter. It proves Nietzsche was right. When morality dies, resentment becomes bullets. I'm curious. So those are my thoughts on this elephant in the room, Shea. And don't hold back. Like the one thing I don't want on this show is I don't want you to change your opinion because you think you need to because you're in front of somebody that disagrees with you. If you fervently disagree with me, then do so.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, the concept of you said centrics several times, and I don't know if you're referring to like centrism. First, I want to figure that out. When you say, do you mean?
So somebody that is able to, whether we're speaking spiritually, politically, governmentally, whatever, that's able to stand in the middle of the room and say, I agree with this, but disagree with that, but I agree with this and I disagree with that, and kind of accumulate something.
Someone who's objectively
yes.
open-minded.
Yeah. Yes.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So when you talk about the spirit of the time, yes, it's reached an antipodal extreme. That is to say, the wedge between what we call the American left and the American right and in the West broadly is becoming more and more antipodal. It means more and more opposite, to the point where Tim Pool put out a tweet, I think it was yesterday, and he said, there is no more shared reality, there is no more conversation. And I don't like Tim Pool. I don't like Tim Pool at all. But
neither do I, honestly.
That he's a fucking tool. And he's he's a dork. But what he's saying is unfortunately not necessarily untrue. We have reached a point where we can no longer agree on objective reality. The conversation has become, and even with tools, like if you go on Twitter, which is really fucking toxic right now. But if you go on Twitter and you have Grok and you can tag Grok and it can come in and try to give you like factual information about something, even with that tool, you can have a meme that's reproduced and reproduced, and it can be falsified, and there could be some AI driven editing, and this can be mirrored over and over again. Yes, the spirit of our political discourse is more toxic, more destructive, more resentful, more hateful, more aggressive than since the Civil War. That I think is undeniable. That's speaking on the separation entirely. I think what we have lost, what we do not have the ability to do, and where we're kind of what I can say we're losing on both sides. I don't like the both sides language because I don't think
Neither
it's
do I.
helpful.
I
It's
agree
and
with
I
you
hate
completely.
makes me throw up. Enlightened centrism makes me throw up. But there's just certain things I think are true, and I don't think there's any centrism to it. So if someone believes the world is flat and someone believes it's round, I'm sorry, I think it's round. I'm a globetard, and you're not going to have a centrist. What's the centrist position? That it's oblong? Like there's no centrist position to have.
Yeah.
Then there's either we can believe in what scientists have to say or we cannot. And I think intellectual inquiry is important. I think education's important. And there's an anti-intellectual movement in our country, and I hate that. And there's Christian nationalism, I hate that. But
Agreed.
I think some things there's so then we get into, if you really dig into someone's heart and you say fuck left, fuck right, let's talk about what matters to us. Do we probably want, when we're not having someone over our head screaming into our ear and we're just sitting in a room, we're having a beer with each other, do we think it's okay that if someone is meaningfully trying to work and assert themselves, that they should probably have healthcare and education? And most people probably say, yeah, man, I don't want you to have to go to a emergency room and die. I don't want a pregnant woman to have to give, afraid to go to someone with diabetes, afraid to go or to the emergency room. Or I don't want elderly people who can't afford their medication because they're on SSI or Social Security. I think most people are gonna go, we should probably take care of our people. And then if you sit down and you say, well, we have our borders, and yes, I think people coming, I think refugees should be considered, but at the same time, we can't allow so many in at once, or not have a border. I think we can then have a conversation there. What happens is, though, these ideas start to become so edified that it becomes identity, and therefore all these things must be true and all these things must be true. And that's where I think it's not productive. I don't agree personally now. I don't agree with everything on the left, certainly not. In some ways things are handled, and there's some things that are on the right that I agree with. But I mostly think that there's the key crucial things that matter to me are generally leftist. Things about healthcare, education, science, the world is round. These are generally things that seem to be on the left spectrum, and higher conspiratorial thinking on the right. But there's a couple of things on the right that I think are helpful. Some of the messaging around physical training we talked about. Some of the messaging, um, eh, some of God, it's become so aggressive. But some of the ideas of conservatives stopping and going, wait, should we change this right now, or should we talk about it? So at its core, conservatism saying, no, wait, maybe we should not move so fast with something. Maybe we should not change so quickly. I think that's a force, broadly speaking, that should have a voice. Um, but the force of change should also have a voice. So the Dionysian versus the Apollonian, I think when in tandem, I think can be productive. And there should be a battle between them. But what we've reached is a point where that discourse is not happening. So I think as what we're having now is, as individuals, we might agree with some things over here. We might agree with some things over here. But there's some fundamental things that matter to me, and I think for the most part, that's where I draw my alliance. But there's certain points when people are talking, and I go, I don't agree with that's being said. I think that's a weird way of saying it. That's a weird way of approaching it. And I don't think we're going to win anyone that way.
You
And I
know,
hope there's, you know,
uh-huh. I think you should talk about your views a little bit more when it comes to this shit, because I think that was like, how do I put this? The most enlightened perspective on what the hell is going on right now that I've heard come out of anyone's mouth in the last 5 years.
oh, that's nice of you to say. Um, no, you know what it is. Let me have a conversation that goes even further here.
Okay, go for it.
I stopped discussing politics publicly on my pages probably like 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I'll tell you why. I have to look at what my priority is. My priority is to give depth to the satanic religion, to the left-hand path, to teach on how it can be empowering for you, so on and so forth. Around 2015, 2016, the political discourse changed irreversibly.
Agreed.
And now if I talk about something, I allow my teachings, I allow my lessons, the courses, my lectures, my book to tell you how I feel about certain issues. I feel if it's just thrown out there, it's not going to be a discourse, especially online, and it's going to alienate a lot of my people. Well, you'll say, if you fucking really disagree with them that much, do you really want them? Do you really want these readers and things like that? And I think there's different ways we can communicate with each other. I think there's a lot of people that follow me who go, I know Shea probably doesn't agree with me. Like, I know there's a few MAGA people that follow me, and I know people probably think he probably doesn't agree with me, but he's not lighting a torch up my ass, and he is teaching, like, he is being authentic to himself, and what he teaches is power is to them is useful, and it's something they find empowering. So, uh, that is the level of discourse we can have that's a little more subtle than me just saying, I love universal health care. Let's fucking go at it. Fuck you if you don't.
Right.
Let's
Yep.
fucking go at it. I would rather find a way for us to have a useful conversation. And so that's why I walk a line where I don't want to alienate um what is a more than you would expect right wing people in that read my books and take my courses. Um
Yeah.
one would be surprised, but it's because I focus on the satanic precepts. I focus on left hand path philosophy. I never hesitate to talk about my ideas on humanism and communalism and how we should collaborate and work together. I just don't spell out my politics in a really oblique one liner
Well, and I don't think
angry.
anyone should. I don't think anyone should. I think that that's dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, it's dangerous, and it's really derivative, and we're not really. I try to show by action. You know what I mean? We
Yeah,
can no longer
that's
talk
yeah.
about why things are better, just show by action
I agree
why
with you.
things are better. But it's a thing that kind of sucks. We can't for example, you and I can have a discussion about Donald Trump, say for instance. You and I could probably have a beer. We've known each other. We trust each other enough
Mm.
because we've known each other a couple of years. That we could probably have a beer, and if and we could have a conversation at that without going to slugs and saying "fuck you." I hope
Yep.
we can probably have a disagreement and move on because we've come to know each other. I've come to
Yeah.
know you more as a person before we immediately went to the divisive conversation.
Yep.
And so that's what I prefer to do with people, is that we learn each other, the human side. Like, I recently lost my mother, and um we all, as a universal concept, we all lose people and it hurts. And if we can share that type of human side, it reminds us to not let this political reality drive an immediate wedge. We can start to learn by experience. You're human. You may disagree with this thing with me, but you also go through the human things that I go through. And I think in our time, that's far more useful than
Yeah.
violent reprisal.
What I miss is I remember. So when I was a young adult, in my early to mid 20s, I had a friend in the States. His name's Steve. Steve watches my stuff, so what's up, Steve? And him and I, over a bottle of Clan McGregor Scotch, would talk for hours about politics. And we fundamentally disagree with each other on quite a bit of shit. But the way that those conversations went, we didn't present a problem, then present blame. We presented a problem and then said, how do we fix this? Like, what's a solution? Right? What could potentially be a solution with this? And one of the problems that I feel in political discourse today is we get so heated about the problem, and then we present blame, and then we get so heated about the blame that nobody's looking at a solution. Nobody looks at looks at it as like a solution-based conversation. You know, it's this is fucked up and it's your fault. No, this is fucked up and it's your fault. You know, your people did this and that's why this is fucked up. And it's like, okay, can we just agree that things are how they are? Can we talk about a solution? Like, if there's a problem, right, regardless of whether people agree with lifestyles or don't agree with lifestyles, that's irrelevant. A person's lifestyle shouldn't come into question of whether or not politics should be an aspect of things. But if we sit there and we say, okay, this is a problem. Okay, I don't necessarily think it's a problem, but what do you present as a solution? Right? That's a conversation that people should be having. Right? And I feel like that type of conversation is what the left-hand path teaches you to have.
Right. I think, I think the left-hand path does guide us to have some direction here. The left-hand path teaches autonomy, and it teaches individual sovereignty. It also teaches us personal strength, self-overcoming. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us probably then being queer, being gay, or homosexual, lesbian, bisexual, whatever your sexuality is probably your fucking choice, and you're not going to tell me what to do with it. That's probably what we can glean from that. I don't know if anyone's going to be able to make a strong argument otherwise. Further, this is the bigger question because it's been sensationalized to the end of the earth. The question of trans. Now, that is someone reinventing themselves in their way, and I think the left-hand path supports someone doing that. Reimagining who they are. And whether we want to agree with it or not, or whether, no, you're still a man, that's their choice. And as left-hand path, it's their right to do it. And I think from the left-hand path side, I think it'd be strange to preoccupy yourself telling them who they are. Unless you see evidence they're trying to incur on you. And
that's exactly my point. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Dylan Mulvaney advertising Bud Light. If you want to argue if that's something being pushed on you, I mean, there's a lot of other shit in media, bullshit media. So why focus on that? That's not being pushed on you. Bud Light is a shit drink anyway. So, like, drink an IPA or something. So yeah, I think when it comes to identity, the left-hand path teaches us that live and let live.
Exactly.
Just don't push it on me. And I don't see, I think the arguments for it being pushed on people comes from a very Christian, conservative direction.
Well, and I think it's like the conversational aspect that I think that needs to happen with that is like, okay, let's say, and by the way, everybody, when I say like I don't disagree, when I said earlier I disagree with this, you do. I'm not saying any particular argument. I'm just throwing it. There's nothing specific behind it. So please don't anybody clip that and say, oh look, he doesn't agree with this. No, there was no argument there. It was just a statement. So I think the type of conversation that needs to happen is both sides or both like camps of people or a lot of people in general feel like there are specific things in different ways that infringe on what is their way of life. And I think the conversation needs to happen, like the actual conversation, the actual question needs to be asked. Okay, I'm sorry that you feel that way. Why? Why does it? Why do
Sure.
you feel like this is infringing on your way of life? What can be done so it doesn't feel that way for whoever it is? If it's right, if it's left, if it's whatever, right? And obviously, there's going to be idiots that are going to come out with really stupid shit and stupid responses. And, okay, we're not going to listen to you. But we need to find people that are willing to have that conversation. And I know it sounds like fucking grade school, but goddamn, man, like I feel like we need to break it down like that. Like, we need to sit people in a room and be like, have a mediator that says, no, just stop blaming,
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And yeah, and I think that's to me that's the easiest conversation to have. Is just allowing people to live the lives they want without incurring on them. Have your freedom, but do not incur on it. And what I will outwardly say is that I hate Christian nationalism. I resent Christian nationalism. I think our
I
way of
agree with
life
you.
will be completely refuted. And so anyone who pushes Christian nationalism, anyone, I think is an enemy to our community. And I know there's so and that's it. And I think yeah, I want when it comes to Charlie Kirk, I want to live in a world where political violence is never an option.
Agreed.
Also, I hate Christian nationalism and I never want it to take root in this country. Like
I
it
agree. I
has.
agree.
So
I
I
agree.
don't want us to ever be in a situation where we feel murder is the option to discourse.
Mm-hmm. I feel so. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. So this is me making a statement, looking
That
for.
was the housekeeper that just walked in here. That was violence against me. That just happened. Right.
So, this next statement that I'm going to make, I want to see if you agree or you disagree, because I do love the United States. I do love my country, and I label my country as my people. The people in my country comprise the United States, not the government. But I also do believe in constitutional nationalism, not Christian nationalism. The Constitution doesn't mention God. I think it maybe mentions it once. And I believe.
Hold on, brother. Give me 1 second.
Yep, no problem. He's got somebody there in there with him. He's got to make sure that it's it's safe. How's it going, chat? How is everybody? There's a lot of you in here today. I'm sorry that I'm not responding, but I do want you guys to know that when I do an interview, my focus is on the person that I'm speaking to. It's not that I'm ignoring chat. I do see your questions. I do see your comments, but I'm not going to derail my conversation to respond.
It's a very spicy conversation. I'm getting a little more political than I usually do, but
well, I mean,
think that's important. We need direction from the left-hand path. We need to have a way to have this conversation on the left-hand path.
I agree.
We're gonna fall into the binary that the rest of the world is. Where then this side you're choosing becomes far more important than your faith,
exactly,
than your religion, than your spirituality. I think our spirituality gives us guidance on how to have these conversations.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important that two people in our field have this conversation. So the point that I was making. I do believe in the idea concept of, at least with America, constitutional nationalism, which for me just means belief in what the Constitution was created for, what it was set up for, and the amendments added to it, and the freedom, the basics, the basis of it, absolute freedom to all people in the United States, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of, all of these things, your ability to choose and be, what you want to be, and that the government does not have the ability or power to infringe any law onto your way of life, so long as your way of life doesn't infringe on the way of life of others. And I think that that's an important concept. to take into consideration and hold on to, and to believe in, right? Because if more of us, regardless of political alignment, can look at that ideal and say, yes, we all agree with these fundamentals, that we all should be allowed to live our lives how we see fit, believe in what we want to believe in, go to church on Sunday, light up the altar and, worship Satan and the devil. If as long as we agree that each individual has the right to do these things, and it's not forcing somebody else to do something that's against their belief, then what the fuck is the problem?
Yeah, and I think that's, from a left-hand path perspective, what makes it kind of obvious for me, regardless of what your views are on social welfare, healthcare, the border, foreign policy, domestic policy, the economy, the labor workforce, automation, ethnicity, race, identity. If you're in the left-hand path and you're a Satanist, we can at least agree that Christian nationalism is bad. Like,
Yes.
that's an obvious thing. That Christianity as the primary guiding religion and everything that's going to come of it. We can also agree that a satanic panic is probably bad,
Yep.
where people get arrested, where people can get exacerbated charges based on their religion, dealing with witchcraft, the occult,
Mm-hmm.
left-hand path, so on and so forth. We can agree that's bad. Well, I mean, that's already going to give us a lot of direction on what we should feel that's happening with certain groups right now.
Mm-hmm.
Christian nationalism is on a rise. And although they may say other things you like, you may think